Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Anaya. Welcome to the Women's Eye podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This is where you are going to meet fascinating women who are leaving their mark, making a difference in changing lives. This episode is brought to you by Casco Financial Group in Phoenix, Arizona. Catherine Scrivano is the president of Casco Financial Group. She started her business to help people create financial strength and to achieve their dreams. I am so excited for you to meet and get to know my next guest. She is the Chief Meteorologist for ABC News, a mom, a best-selling author, and a mental health advocate. Ginger Zee is joining me to talk about the latest book, her latest book, A Little Closer to Home, in which she shares her very deeply personal struggles with crippling depression, attempted suicide, and other serious challenges that people face every single day. It's a story about healing, her healing, the process of healing, and why it's a lifelong journey. Ginger Zee, welcome to the Women's Eye podcast. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, thank you. I know you've been busy the last couple of days in the elements covering a major winter storm, so I do appreciate you taking the time to chat.
That's why you caught me in my thermals and with my snow-blown hair this morning. So I'm just fresh out of the snow and going to get into some more later.
Well, we appreciate it so much, and thank you again. And congratulations to the success of this great book. It's called A Little Closer to Home, as I mentioned. It's now your second New York Times bestseller and the second book to address mental health, depression, and mental health hospitalization, something you experienced. It did so much to bring awareness to and lessen the stigma around mental health issues. And now with this new book, you go even deeper by sharing some of your most vulnerable life experiences, your struggles, your trauma, your healing, and the process of healing. Thank you so much for writing this book. Was the decision to go as deep as you have in this second book easier or more difficult than the first?
So much easier. It was really, it had to happen once I saw the reaction from the first book. Any ounce of fear or, is this the right choice was gone. And I knew that if I had already helped people with the stories I had told and the tools that I had shared with, the privilege of me being able to have outstanding therapy, wonderful family support, I needed to share that with the rest of the world. And I needed to do it surrounding trauma, because everybody has trauma. You can't delete trauma from your life, but until you learn how to process it, the part where everybody's traumas are different, but our trauma healing can look the same. That's when I realized that this book would be something that I think everybody needs to start talking about.
Well, and your vulnerability and your honesty, I think, has really helped normalize these kinds of conversations for so many people. And there is so much in this book that I personally can relate to, the healing and the healing from trauma. And for you, that trauma includes date rape, abortion, a second suicide attempt, very personal life experiences. And like you mentioned, we all experience trauma differently. And it's something your book encourages us to process, as you mentioned, not delete, if we want to reach that place of healing. So how do we begin to address trauma and reach that place of healing? What kind of work did that take for you in that journey?
I think the first thing is honesty with yourself. I always preach that that's the thing that has saved me. It's being honest with myself, not running away from, or my expert was always, I was always expert at saying, well, that didn't happen. And that way it was me blocking it, but knowingly blocking it, which is even worse, I think. It's a very natural thing to not want to deal with something like date rape. I mean, most people are in shock. A lot of people deal with those stages of the grief the same. It's how you then process it in the latter part. And most importantly, with all of these traumas, we are not meant to do this alone. We're here on the planet together for a reason. And I think one of the biggest issues was I wasn't honest with myself, but then I couldn't even be honest or not honest with other people because I never shared it. And that isolation was one of the worst things I could do, because trauma needs to be shared, and it needs to be, now that I'm doing it, it's just really unbelievable how many people coming out telling me that they share my trauma, or that their experience looked a lot like mine, and they're, maybe they healed differently, or they haven't yet started that process of healing. And that's the part that I'm most interested in. You have to tell the story about the trauma to get there, but it's about the maintenance of healing. And that's something I learned even in the last couple of years in my therapy. Is I've worked through my diagnosis. I've grown out of my diagnosis, but now I'm in this place where I have to work hard to maintain it. And I
Mhm.
want so badly for any trauma that happens in the future to have my toolbox ready, to have my team ready. And here it comes. I know what to do this time.
Well, and sometimes for a lot of people, that trauma doesn't manifest itself right away.
Mhm.
You end up realizing how traumatic that event was later on. Was that the
Yeah,
case for you?
I think so. I also think if I really would have sat and looked in the mirror and said, this just happened, I think I could have given it the gravity that it deserved. I just wasn't ready to do that and didn't for a very long time. And I think being able, everybody's going to process these in different amounts of time. I just think that you don't need to wait 20 years like I did. I think that can be, sped up a bit, and so that you can get through and learn how to take ownership of that narrative that is a part of your story, will always be a part of your story, but now what to do with it and what to do with the feelings and emotions that then came after. I think a lot about when I cover natural disasters, and that's why I wrote the first book and named it that, Natural Disaster. I cover them. I am one, because it's taught me something that a lot of people don't get to see. I have this unique job where I show up and I'm usually one of the first people that you see when you've lost everything. Sometimes you've lost family members, sometimes it's your home, your car. And for 20 years, I show up in these people's yards and I watch their process and I watch the psychology of grief. In a natural disaster, because everyone is doing it together, usually at least a neighborhood's worth, if not a region worth, it's a trauma that you can't avoid, can't run away from, you have to deal with. But they go through these stages of grief. And I watch how people do it a little bit differently. But at the end, usually, they come back to this kind of what I think is like a cliche in news. It's like, well, the community came together, the best of human nature. And that's true. And do you know why? It's because they're sharing the trauma and they can't not hide it. The tornado took their house, it's gone. Now they have to go through it with their neighbor who also lost their home. And that connection of humans on things that they have lost or things that have hurt them or hurt others that they love, it is such a jump start on healing. And I think we can take that as a lesson in how to deal with our own trauma.
Well, and there are so many traumas that we deal with alone because they're not so visible. And you wrote about an attempted suicide in your first book, but it's in this book that you write about a second attempt. And I was struck by what you wrote about how you went about that day, shining on the outside, but dark on the inside. Can you describe for me, and I went through a very deep depression at some point in my life, so I know a little bit about what this is like, but can you describe what you were feeling internally? Because I think it's sometimes hard for people to understand what that place can look and feel like.
I had years of deepening depression and deepening issues that would be triggered certain times to have what I like to call gray days, where I felt down and couldn't get out of bed and had kind of more classic depressive feelings. And I would have fleeting suicidal ideation. And then I would have what I call the darkest days. And I only had that a couple of times. And it was as if the blinds were shut. There was no sliver of life. And all I could think was that I had to go. And that was the only way. I had to get out. And it was, I struggle because I speak about this a lot, and everyone is different. Everybody processes it different. My story, it was not impulsive, but it was certainly strikingly different than the day before and the day after. And that's something that in my story, and anybody who might feel like that I always try to emphasize, is if you can get through a seed deep down in your brain to remember that when it feels that dark, it will not feel like that tomorrow. It won't. Every moment, every emotion is transient. We're moving through these things. And so just like happiness isn't lasting forever, nor should we value it and try to make it last forever. My whole goal changed. My goal is not to be pure joy riding on a ridge all the time. My goal is to feel every emotion today. I want to feel frustrated several times. I want to feel angry several times. I want to feel. And that's what the book really goes into. I think when I was in that place, I couldn't see that there were other feelings that were going to come later. And I'm so glad that I was able to have this privilege of being able to get here. And it's my responsibility now to share it.
I know that also well, because I remember feeling like there was no way out at certain points. And it was the support of my mother, I think, that finally gave me the courage to ask for help, but not everybody has that. And I went back to that just the other day with your Instagram post about the tragic death of former Miss USA Chesley Christ, who recently died by suicide. You wrote, and I just want to quote this for just a moment, "She is so much more than the way she passed, but it's critical that we discuss it. There are resources for suicide, but we must work on the resources for the illness leading up to suicide as well. Suicidal ideation should be taken seriously. Never forget, you can go to the emergency room if you are having those thoughts." That's what I did. And when I finally got help, I so appreciated this post, and it made me wonder, Ginger, how can we reach those friends or those loved ones who may be struggling on the inside, but appear to be shining on the outside? How do we go about doing that?
That's the problem, is a lot of times we won't know. And so you have to give yourself grace, and you have to be ready for the time when they are ready to say something to you and take action. And that's the thing I think gets missed, and why I wanted to emphasize in that post that suicidal ideation should never be taken lightly. If you've thought about taking your life, even once or twice, and it's something that has passed through your mind, you should tell someone else that, because that is the beginning of what could be something greater. And the moment you verbalize it, a little bit of control comes to you in the best way. And you can take control over those thoughts and realize, well, that was a thought because that thought passed. And now I don't have that thought. And tomorrow I might, but let me see what's getting me to that place. And you can start processing it. But if you just keep it isolated somewhere separate and you haven't said a thing to anybody, it could come back, and then you're not going to do something with it again. And it can grow and it can deepen. And you never, so I think that the simplest, cheapest way is to talk to somebody, to anybody. And then that person, and here's where we all need to be prepared as team members, even from the very outside periphery of like an acquaintance or, a stranger, to be ready to be judgment free and say, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I need to get you help. Because if we saw someone with a shattered leg, we would help them get to the hospital, physically lift them into something that we could get them into a car to get them to the hospital. We need to do that with mental health too. If you hear that, that's a shatter to me. Okay, so you're having that. You don't just say, oh, okay, well, that's good that you need, you think you might need some help. Go help them find help, because that person who's in that darkest place is not about to leaf through their insurance booklet to see who they can go to and make a bunch of phone calls to see who they can get in with. And that's something that I would highly suggest everybody takes as, okay, trigger time, let me go. Let me get this action started. I'm on the team. And then they'll feel immediate relief that you're there taking some of that pressure off as well.
Well, and that goes back to the resources that you talk about leading up to suicide and finding access to therapy and correct diagnosis, because it's just not easy for a lot of people. You said in your book that you worked with 10 therapists before finding Dr. Wilson, your current therapist, whom you call your greatest teacher on your road to recovery. Where do we begin to make that process of finding help and the access to resources easier for people?
This is the hardest. It's the access for the financial part, because there are great therapists out there, lots of them, but they cost money. I don't know if you don't have money, it is really hard to get more than 10 sessions depending on your insurance. And then a lot of the younger, newer, and not to say they're not good, but a lot of them will start to accept some of the insurance or different Medicaid, Medicares. I think that if I had a dream-like scenario, the whole system gets overhauled and we have one place accessible in rural areas, in urban areas, where we know that it is safe to go, whether I'm just kind of having some down days and I'm not sure what to do with it, or I'm all the way to suicidal ideation. That funnel needs to happen into one place where these professionals who are kind of the general practitioners of mental health, specifically for that, because some general practitioners are trained in it, but not all. But I would say that funnel, and then to be able to disseminate and say, okay, I've given you a diagnosis in the 2 to 3 times. It may be right, it may be a little off, but we'll go with it for right now, because this is going to get you the type of help you need. The problem is a lot of the therapists I was seeing weren't performing the therapy that I needed because I was misdiagnosed. It would be like me having gone, hurt my knee and then getting sent to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Like, they're aware, they kind of studied some of it, but they're not going to be able to give me the specialty help I needed. And so that's what I would really love to see with mental health. And after this book, I don't know that writing is going to help anymore. I need to start taking action myself. And I think my dream would be to be able to be like the Betty Ford of mental health. Betty Ford made drugs and alcohol, not just raised awareness, but she said, now I'm going to give people a place to go. And it's going to be like branded wise, like the McDonald's almost of rehabilitation. And that took time. Drugs and alcohol had a stigma for a long time, but now if you say I'm going to drug rehab, people say, good for you. Mm-hmm. That's what I'd love to see with mental health. If somebody has to go to a rehabilitation center that's somewhere in the near future, my dreams, that people say, good for you.
I look forward to seeing that one day. You talk about healing, it being a lifelong journey. You admit that you still get those gray days that you talked about. What are some tools you've learned to help in your healing process? I know writing is something that you obviously have said has been extremely helpful for you.
Yes. First is Audible. First, right away, if I start to feel that in the morning, and often it's in the morning where I just feel different. I just don't feel like myself. I feel whatever. I acknowledge that. And I ask myself now, is there a reason? Is there a trigger? What's happening? And then a lot of times I'll say it out loud because I think of it as something I can see, like a fog or a kind of closing of blinds. And I'll say, I see you. As soon as I do that, it starts to put I'm in charge. And it's not coming to take me. But I also then always share that I see you. I see it with my mother, my husband, and my therapist, the core of my team. Mm-hmm. And now I take it to a next step further. I'll put it on Instagram. I'm having a down day. This is just one of those days. Everybody has them. Mine feels a little this way, I mean, I don't think everybody needs to go around sharing everything like that. But you want to have power over it, you do that. You want to have community with it, you do that. So I would say on a day-to-day level, if you're having one of those days, just telling your core team, making sure that your professional in your life has a place and knows those things. And okay, now let's figure out what the trigger was. Is there something new, or is this kind of one of your old go-tos? How is your brain wiring? And then the easiest thing, and this is, nobody wants to hear this, just like we don't want to hear about how, physical health works. The very basics is, did you sleep enough? Have you focused on sleep? Do you have solid nutrition and whole foods in you and lots of hydration of water? It's so boring, but it is paramount in mental health.
It's the foundation.
Yes. You can't do it without it. You're not able to do it without it. So why would you ever think that you could get your mind right when your blood flow to your brain is not there?
Mm-hmm. So basic questions we need to ask ourselves really on a daily basis. And, you have admitted that you never set out to write a mental health book, and now you've written 2. You've heard from people who've said you've changed and saved their lives. And that's just incredibly powerful. Did you ever expect that your story and your message would have the impact that it has on readers?
No. Never. I couldn't have imagined that. And I'm still floored every time I get a message. And when I write back, I often just start with, I am honored you shared your story with me, because it feels like I get to be this gatekeeper of a lot of people's beginnings, and I think that the beginning of healing is that first time you reach out and tell someone, even if it's a random person you read their book. I think there's a real power in being able to be that. It's just like when I'm the first person you talk to when you lost your home. It's a very, I take it not lightly, to be in this place. And then I'm not a doctor. I don't have the education. I will never claim to know what to do with them, but I will encourage them in places where I know that they can go find help. And a lot of times that's all they need, is just that person to say, it's okay, go ahead. You're a stranger. Sometimes it's even harder. And I'll tell you, just from my experience of writing this book, I've had fewer conversations with my intimate family and friends because it's hard. It's hard for them to read and talk about bad things that happen to somebody that they love. I've had a much broader conversation with strangers because it's easier. There's less attachment. And that's an easy place to start. And that's how I would think of it from someone else as well. It doesn't have to be your mom if that's not a safe place for you or doesn't feel like it is. It just has to be a person.
Well, and sharing that connection really does help not only yourself, but so many other people know that they're not alone in this journey. And closer to home is that book that you say is really for everyone. So what do you hope that people will take away from your journey and this book?
Well, I hope that it really changes I hope that it advances the stigma part of action, where if somebody needs to go to the hospital, we don't raise our eyebrows and go, ooh, what's going on with them? Because here I am, the hospital is how I got here. So I think we should all treat that response and start to think about that response differently. And I include myself in that, because even though I've gone to the hospital, of course that means there's something a little bit more heavy going on, probably. Good for them. I want us to all really, really think about that thought of how, and I think that's what I've looked at, and how I've completely turned how much responsibility I put on my mother or my father or any of that, because it's us. At the end of the day, yes, they form you and they help form your identity. But I think of my identity now as a fuse box. And a lot of it was even not wired at all, or, and I've been working really hard the last 10 years to wire it. And I'm right now at the point where I'm able to flip those fuses in light. Mm-hmm. And it feels so joyful. And I don't want to use just joy, but peaceful, because I know that the anger and the frustration and the sadness, all of them are in there and they can light them, but I have a bit more of a sense of my core of my identity. And I want people to be able to all have that, because it is such a peaceful place and everyone deserves it. And you have to know that. And that's something that I finally found within myself, within that constant rush of, and I was exhausted trying to think of how hard I worked to cover up who I was, mm-hmm. or what my story was, or what was going on in my mind. And now that it's out, I feel not just relief. It's like fuel. It's like energy. It's this, and it really is peace. And I want everyone to know that, because I found the assurance right inside me.
Well, and I love that you use the word peace. And I know you've said you prefer that over happy, because happy is just, it's so relative. And sometimes it's just such a heavy word.
Yeah, happy is, you can't be happy 100% of the time. That wouldn't even be good. That's not healthy. But peace brings you to neutral. Nobody's living at 100 miles per hour and nobody's living at, full break. And so giving ourselves that grace to live in between is really peaceful.
And that grace to feel everything, like you said, feel all the emotions.
Yes. I love when I get frustrated now. I'm like, good, check one of those off the list. I've got to do that at some point today.
Well, Ginger, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Congratulations again on your newest book. Again, it's called A Little Closer to Home. Thank you for sharing your mental health journey and for normalizing these conversations and for keeping these conversations going. So appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. And you can learn more about Ginger Zee by going to our website, thewomenseye.com. I also want to let you know that The Women's Eye has 2 books. The first is called 20 Women Changemakers. You can shop for it wherever you buy books and at changemakersbook.com. And our newest book, 20 Women Storytellers. It's right here. It's out now, where you can find out more about it at womenstorytellersbook.com. Just go there. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Women's Eye podcast. I thank you so much for joining me, and to my guest again, Ginger Zee, the wonderful Ginger Zee. I'm Catherine Anaya. Until next time, remember, it's the world as we see it.